Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
Coming up on 8 minutes before 8 now, with so much of our conversation focusing on Ukraine, the possibility of Russians, some kind of, possibly to mark the anniversary they come back. Let's go straight to Brussels. British Defence Secretary Ben Wallace joins me now. What needs to come out of the summit, the meetings that are taking place in Brussels? Secretary of State, good morning to you.
Good morning, Nick. Well, first of all, what needs to come out is a message to President Putin that the international community is still as solid as it was last February after the invasion, and I don't think there can be any doubt of that. Not only have we seen from the Ramstein, which was a meeting in Germany we had about 2 weeks ago, an increase in donations, and we also seen the international agreement on tanks being put in. I think that's the most important message to Putin, that his calculation that we'll all be bored by 2023 is not correct. Secondly, we met with our Ukrainian counterpart yesterday to make sure we're continually able to put into Ukraine the extra ammunition that they need, but also that we are able to deliver the training that is required to make sure that Ukraine's armed forces not only use those munitions in a better way, but also that they can move better on the battlefield collectively, and we call it combined arms maneuver, in order to push the Russians back. Because I think 2023 and 2024 is going to be about working to expel Russia from its gains.
You think through 2024, Secretary of State, you see this going through the whole of this 12-month period?
Well, I think my point is it would be wrong to sort of say troops home by Christmas. I think, the lessons of conflict is never say things like that. Secondly, we are up against a president of Russia who has no regard for his own citizens. About 2 weeks ago, the American assessment was 188,000 dead or injured Russian soldiers so far. And we've seen reports that over last week, almost a whole brigade, which was attacking Volodar, a small mining town in the east of Ukraine, a whole Russian brigade was effectively annihilated or destroyed. They lost nearly 1,000 or over 1,000 people in 2 days. So it's unpredictable when you have a president and a Russian general staff that defies reality or ignores reality and simply doesn't care how many people they're killing of their own, let alone of the people they're trying to oppress.
Reminding my listeners, you're a senior military bloke yourself. Can I characterise it in are the good guys, that is the men and women fighting Ukraine, supplied, supported by NATO members, are they winning, Secretary of State?
I think they are winning. Nice of you to say high ranking. I think I was made it to a dizzy rank of captain, but I think they.
There was so much potential, Secretary of State. I don't know why you left it.
Yeah, well, there's a long story there, but I think they are winning. Remember, Russia aimed this time last year almost to take 8 main objectives: Kyiv, Odessa, all these big cities. It hasn't managed to take a single one, or even hold the one they had, Kherson, and they have lost 188,000. 97% of the Russian army is now committed to Ukraine. That leaves 3% guarding Norway, Vladivostok in the Far East, the other borders with China. I mean, that's all in, with probably a damage to their combat effectiveness of nearly 40%. So Ukraine, outgunned, outnumbered, has inflicted massive loss on Russia. And in the long run, he's already lost. He's lesser in the world. He's sanctioned up to the hilt. His army is destroyed. His reputation for an invincible army is in tatters. Ukraine has taken back most of the territory, but not all, that Russia took in February last year. And the cost for Russians of taking even a few hundred meters is in the hundreds. And eventually, that will come back to the Russian population, and they'll realize, 188,000 people have wives and mothers and family and friends. As long as the West stays united and continues to supply Ukraine, I think Ukraine still has the momentum.
So when noting the bravery of the men and women serving in our armed forces who would be ready to stand up for king and country, when you see reports that in France they're concerned about the level of military cuts in the UK, and Germany thinks that the UK is not ready to lead a rapid response force, they might have to retain control. Secretary of State, how do you respond?
Well, first of all, Nick, those reports are not correct. So Germany, when you describe Germany as an unnamed source and a website you and I have never heard of, right? The reality is we're taking over the VJTF in 2024. So the fact of the article in the newspaper is wrong. And secondly, in our discussions here at NATO, that is not correct. SACA, Supreme Allied Commander Europe, wouldn't simply allow you to take over the VJTF, as we call it, the very high readiness brigades, if that was the case. So we did say in the newspaper article that's untrue, but they printed it anyhow. And as far as the French go, I was with my French colleagues yesterday, and we don't see that. It wasn't raised with me. It hasn't been raised amongst our military officials. All of us across Europe have a challenge, which is Ukraine has exposed our vulnerabilities that all of us have over the decades, and including France. All of us have had hollowing out. Germany is on record talking about its own forces being hollowed out. I'm on record saying that the last 30 years saw our armed forces hollowed out. We all have been exposed by this invasion of not having the right ammunition stocks that we should have, of not having the right readiness levels we should have. And that's why we're all spending extra money. We got an extra 24 billion in 2020. France announced, I think last week, an extra 100 billion between now and 2030. 20 of 30 NATO countries are increasing their spending. That is a reality, and we're going to have to put that right. But no one's trying to hide anything. But fundamentally, we are taking over the VJTF, and the unnamed German source in a website. I think I wouldn't base my strategic requirements on that person.
I expected more robust language there, Secretary of State, but we'll move.
I've been told off for using robust language.
It was on your lips, so I could tell it was coming any minute. Can we respond to reports that you are seeking an extra £10 billion from the Chancellor for the MOD next month?
Well, I'm like any Secretary of State affected by inflation. And remember, defence, like probably the Department of Transport, spends huge amounts on capital, so hardware and equipment programs will affected by inflation, which is why we're all agreed in government that we've got to deal with inflation more than anything. But of course, I have pressures as a result of this. I have pressures as a result of the growth in the threat that we face. And so I'll be negotiating with my friend, the Chancellor, to get a settlement between now and the budget. That's important. Of course, he's got to deal with all the other departments. You wouldn't expect anything else from me. I'm not going to conduct the negotiations in public, and I'm not going to tell you how much I'm needing. I've read lots of reports ranging on huge amounts. One of the interviews earlier today said I wanted to double to 100 billion the defence budget, which I don't even recognise at all. So I think the key here is I need to get through to the next 2 years. Then we have another government spending review, which will cover the next 4 years. That's the most important period. That's when government should indicate where its priorities are. In the past, we've seen it, for example, in 2018, where it said the NHS is our big priority for the next period. And I think that's where the negotiations will be very important. Now, we saw in the autumn statement the Chancellor and the Prime Minister recognised that defence would need more money. That was announced in the autumn statement, and I think everyone gets the challenges we face, so we'll just have to negotiate between now and the budget.
So to say, I'm not sure of the chain of command, but were your permission or guidance sought as a result of the idea of shooting down a so-called Chinese spy balloon over United Kingdom territory? Would you approve that?
Well, let's see. I mean, it would be me. It would be me or the Prime Minister who would make that decision. And I think what we're going to do is, first and foremost, we're going to learn about the technology and the debris that the Americans have now collected and are collecting from their sort of interdiction of this. Let's find out how vulnerable we were, or were we vulnerable. And remember that at that altitude, and I think it's important for your listeners, which I'm discovering as well, it's quite actually a crowded area. It is not rare for balloons to be floating around up there, whether they're weather balloons or other things. The Russians, for example, use fairly cheap weather balloons sometimes to try and distract or confuse air radar. I think it's important that, first of all, I get an assessment of quite how crowded, above sort of 80,000 feet is, or the higher altitudes, and indeed what threat is posed from that to us. But I think the point is everything is on the table. If we thought it was a threat to our population or indeed a national security, and we thought we could do something about that safely, because it would have to come down somewhere,
yes,
then of course I wouldn't hesitate to take the right decision to protect us.
The US used Sidewinder missiles. You're probably be aware they cost around $400,000. The first one missed. It took two. That's nearly $1 million. It's a lot of money to spend.
Well, that's one of the lessons of Ukraine is over the last few decades, we have put a lot of money in the West into very exquisite platforms that cost billions of dollars or hundreds of millions of dollars. And, enemies are quite clever at working out that if you can use up someone's stocks of $500,000 missiles, they will run out pretty quickly, and you've only spent a few $100,000. And I think it's been really telling how Ukrainians have used equipment to deceive Russia on the ground and make them, just like you said, fire off expensive pieces of equipment. And I think that's one of the things where we've all got to go back to the drawing board about attrition, as we would call it. Things that are very expensive and exquisite, you don't want to lose. But if you have cheap things, then you might be prepared to throw them up in the air and risk half of them not coming back. So I think that is what this conflict has exposed, how dependent we have become in the West on exquisite, expensive platforms, which do an amazing job, by the way. Let's not underestimate the importance of them. But also what happens when someone uses a cheap balloon to distract you.
Lastly, how concerned should we be the next time you're on important meetings in Wyre and Preston North, or I'm wandering aimlessly down Blackheath High Street, that I might be being spied on by a Chinese camera just 10 feet above my head through local authority or police? There are these worries now, which I'm sure you're aware, Secretary of State.
Well, so first of all, it's not new that cheap technology is vulnerable, whether it's made in China or anywhere else. We could all go into our shops now and buy pretty reasonable, compared to the old days of CCTV, cameras, and we all have in our houses the Internet of Things. And if we don't even take the most basic precautions, like changing the administrative passwords on them, we can be hacked. And you're more likely to be hacked by a criminal than you are about a state. China, no offence to you, Nick, or no offence to me, I'm not sure China is really interested in following me around Preston North and Wyre, or you around Blackheath. But they are interested, obviously, in my sensitive networks and my defence programmes and my industry. And that's where we put the focus in our areas about getting rid of certain vulnerabilities like Huawei, which is very important to get out of our network. And I think that's the question for everyone, is when you're buying this equipment, depending on who you are, whether you're a private citizen trying to protect your house or whether you are a government institution, you should ask yourself, what is the balance between the risk you're prepared to take and who is after your information? And I think that let's be realistic here. People buying cameras to protect their houses from a burglar, I'm not sure, unless they're running a secret cell from within their house, I'm not sure we should be too worried, other than they should make sure they take the basic precautions of proper passwords, protective, get yourself a security, whatever you call it, protect your Wi-Fi, use VPN.
Yeah, firewalls and things such as that, indeed. Best of luck for your endeavours in Brussels, and thanks for your time this morning. Defence Secretary Ben Wallace appearing here on LBC, which gives you the latest news headlines for Thomas Watts.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.